Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the new year of the Worshipping God by Watching and Talking About Anime. As always, I am your host, Religious Fanboy, and today we are discussing the Christian lessons and themes that are told in episode 1 of the new anime, ZENSHU. The lesson for this episode is that the pressure we put on ourselves from our future expectations prevents us from doing what God is calling us to do in the present. Our Bible verses for today are James chapter 4, verses 13 through 15, which says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." The illustration from this episode is how Natsuki Hirose is overwhelmed by her expectations about the future to the point where she is incapable of doing what she needs to do in the present. The genre of anime that this show is in is an isekai. In episode 1, we see how the immense pressure she puts on herself to animate and get projects out on time, in addition to the immense pressure and level of success that is expected of her, leads to her overworking herself to the point where she has seemed to even die from her workaholic tendencies. But it isn't until she is teleported into the world of one of her favorite animes that she is encouraged by her art supplies to draw in order to save the characters from the impending invasion of monsters. Our first talking point is that God does not call us to create a 5-year plan. From the time we grow as we are kids until the time we are well into our adulthoods, we are expected to have a 5-year plan, whether that be where are you wanting to go to college, what are you wanting to study, or even one of the questions that we are asked at a very young age is, what do we want to do when we are grown up? But these are expectations that the world gives us. We are asked to have a pretty good idea of what the rest of our life will look like. But we are incapable of knowing what the rest of our life will look like. But God calls us to have faith and trust in Him, because God is aware of things will go due to Him existing both within time and outside of time. And we are told through Scripture that God has already made a plan for us. That doesn't mean that we don't have free will in whether or not we choose to take part in every bit of God's plan. But that does mean that when life is hard and we feel overwhelmed by our present circumstances and future expectations, that we are able to trust in God and have faith to take the first step and be hopeful in doing so, and trusting that we will finish walking the trail, but God doesn't expect us to have already finished walking the trail. Our second talking point is that the world tells us to pursue and celebrate the peaks of our lives, but God calls us to a life with hills and valleys. A lot of the future expectations that Natsuko puts on herself is because of her prior successes in being able to produce anime. And our lives can also be like this, where if we were really successful in high school and hyperfixate on the successes we've had in previous stages of our lives, it can often make it hard for us to live with the difficulties of our current seasons of life. This is something that I still have hard time struggling with, but in a worldly mindset where we talk about how this insert time of your life is going to be the best part of your life, it sets us up to fail thinking that everything that led up to that point and everything that proceeds that point must be less than if we've already hit our peak. But God calls us to look at life differently. God calls us to a life of many hills and many valleys. And even though the hills and our mountaintop moments in our walk with Christ and in our lives are fun and enjoyable to us, that does not mean that God isn't teaching us and preparing us for our next mountaintops and hills within our valleys. And because of that, we too are able to celebrate our valleys and appreciate them in hindsight and even have hope in the midst of our suffering as we are experiencing the valleys of life. And now I'm going to move on to our 4 discussion questions as we wrap up. The first question is, what stood out to you from this Bible verse or this episode? Our second discussion question is, what is a dream or goal that you've had that has at one point in your life been a source of stress? Our second discussion question is, what are some internal or external reasons for that dream or goal to have become a priority in your life? And our third question is, of your New Year's resolutions, which ones are most important to you? And what are some things that you can pray about as you take those first steps in pursuing those goals that can allow you to surrender them to God and trust that God will help you and encourage you to do what God has planned for you to do and what you desire to do this year? And with that being said, may God be with you, and see you next time. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to this new channel that will be the home of our long-form content. All of our podcasts will start being uploaded to here on YouTube, as well as please check out some of our other podcasts, such as the Worshipping God by Watching and Talking About Wrestling podcast, where we discuss the Christian lessons and themes that are paralleled in the matches of the January 1st AEW Dynamite, as well as our new episode of the Church Hunt Prep podcast, where we start our series of comparing Wesleyan and Calvinist theology as we explore the topic of total depravity. And have a great rest of your week. God bless.